Hello, it's Nick with Run Testers. In this video, we're going to be comparing the Nike Alphafly NEXT 2 and the Nike Vaporfly NEXT 2. So the Vaporfly and Alphafly are Nike's top-of-the-range carbon racing shoes, but obviously some very key differences between the two of them. The Vaporfly is the cheaper, lighter shoe. It weighs in at 207 grams or 7.3 ounces in my UK size 9, whereas the Alphafly in that size by Nike is listed at 249 grams. My two shoes have weighed slightly different amounts, but they're 244 grams or 251 grams, which is 8.6 ounces. So, you know, it is a fair bit heavier than the Vaporfly. Part of that is got a slightly higher stack. Nike doesn't give official stack height, but the Alphafly pushes right up to that 40mm limit, whereas the Vaporfly maybe comes in a couple of millimeters lower. They both are listed as having an 8mm drop, which is interesting on the Alphafly 2, as the original was listed at 4mm, although it looks pretty similar on the shoes. The Vaporfly, the cheapest versions you'll find at full RRP are £209.95 in the UK or $225 in the US. Nike has not confirmed the price of the Alphafly 2 to us ahead of this launch date as yet, but assuming it will probably be around the same price as the original, which was £259.95 in the UK or $275 in the US. Both the shoes have more expensive options if you're looking at special editions and that kind of thing as well. So when it comes to the design of the shoe, both got, quite nice open, breathable mesh, kind of knit uppers. The Vaporflies is changed a little bit, obviously, from the original NEXT, which had the vapor weave material. But yeah, you've now got a little bit more structure to the mesh, trying to hold the foot in place, and it doesn't kind of sag up around the forefoot as much as the original Vaporfly NEXT. It also has a little bit of reinforcement around the toe box to try and increase the durability of the shoe and lift the upper off your toes a little bit. The midsole is entirely made of Nike's PEBA-based ZoomX cushioning with a full-length carbon plate. It's the good stuff. It's the bouncy ZoomX foam that we all know and love. And the outsoles, very familiar. It's got the kind of forefoot coverage with two strips of rubber at the back to kind of give you grip where you need it most without adding too much weight to the shoe. On the Alphafly 2, they have a new version of Atom Knit. It's Atom Knit 2.0, which has a little bit more structure maybe than the original Atom Knit, and it certainly feels a bit firmer, and there's a lot more support and structure around the heel in particular to try and avoid slippage and create a good fit around there. The toe box overlay has been redesigned on the second version of the shoe as well to create a kind of less restrictive feel around there, and then you've got this kind of booty design that you have to pull on with these two pull tabs, which can be a little bit tight and hard to get on, but once it's on, it feels very nice on the foot, I find. Now the midsole differs from the Vaporfly in that you have lots of ZoomX foam, obviously, but you also have the Air Zoom pods under the forefoot, which have a slightly firmer feel to try and create a bit more pop and energy return in your toe off in particular. With the Alphafly 2, there's also now some ZoomX foam under the AirPods that wasn't there on the original Alphafly. That's one of the key changes to the second version of the shoe. Of course, you've got a full length carbon plate. You can see a lot more of it in the Alphafly because it has this big, midsole cutout you see from beneath to try and reduce the weight of the shoe a little bit. And then the outsole follows a similar pattern to the Vaporfly, but it is a bit different. You've got, again, lots of forefoot coverage and then the two strips at the back, but generally you get a bit more rubber at the back, in particular on the Alphafly, I'd say. It's got a wider heel base than the Vaporfly as well, the new version, to kind of create some stability in this high stack shoe. The pattern has also changed on the outsole compared to the original Alphafly, and the rubber is a bit thinner as well, which creates the room for this foam to be slipped in underneath those Air Zoom pods. And then Nike has also slightly changed the kind of spike at the back on the second version of the shoe. It's a bit more of a wedge these days.
Fit then, and I think I would recommend going true to size in both of these shoes, the Vaporfly NEXT 2 and the Alphafly NEXT 2. One thing, Vaporfly NEXT 2, I think it's kind of much more kind of roomy overall fit. I found it easier to get onto my foot. The Alphafly NEXT is a real struggle for me. I find it very hard to get my foot into this really kind of tight opening. I've got quite a high and wide foot, so getting in is a real struggle. I have to really, really pull hard on these tabs, and it's a bit of a struggle. But one thing I found is that it meant that some of this cushioning that sits just above the heel counter, it got moved around, and it was very hard to get it in the right place, and I got a bit of rubbing then. It does loosen off after the first 2 or 3 runs. It gets easier to put them on, but initially it was a real struggle, though I don't think I would go half a size up, because everywhere else, once they're on the foot, sort of wraps really nicely and feels quite snug and quite comfortable. So I don't think I'd change that up, but it's just a word of warning on fit. I think the Alphafly NEXT 2, like the one, aren't the easiest shoes to get on if you've got kind of high and broad kind of feet.
So just a very quick word on fit from me, because they were both completely true to size. I've had no problems with either the Alphafly or the Vaporfly. The new Alphafly 2 is a little bit hard to get on at first, but I found it was okay after the very first run. Got a nice amount of room in the toe box, good hold around the midfoot, and although the Vaporfly NEXT 2 did have some slight heel slip issues in my first few runs in it, once I got my laces sorted, heel locked it, I've not had any problems since on runs in any distance. So the Vaporfly and Alphafly have probably been my top 2 racing shoes of the past few years. The Vaporfly 2 I've used especially for shorter distances in recent years. I ran my 5k PB in it recently this year, 15:30, and it wasn't until very recently the shoe I had my half marathon PB in as well of 70:25, and it's just a fantastic shoe. It feels more aggressive and tippy forward than the Alphafly underfoot. You're obviously getting that generous cushioning, which is quite soft on the Zoom X, but firms up, I think, when you're running at pace, and you really feel the kind of tip forward and then propulsion of the carbon plate there in the midsole. And it does really help you keep going towards the end of races where you're kind of being tipped forward and just kind of forced to keep rolling on and on and on as you start to tire. Now the Alphafly does a lot of that stuff as well, but in a different way. The feel is definitely different underfoot. It's the original has been my marathon racing shoe of late. I ran a 2:29 and a 2:33 in the original Alphafly last year, and you just get a slightly more cruisy feel with the shoe. I'd say it's more comfortable, and even though you are still getting pushed onto your forefoot with the design of the plate and the foam, and it's got a very energetic toe off because of the Air Zoom pods, it feels like you can just kind of lock into a pace and just keep rolling and rolling and rolling forward, and it will just help you keep going for a long time. But it's not got the same kind of aggressive, nimble feel as the Vaporfly, especially in shorter events where you might be kicking very hard for home. But in the Alphafly, it's more that you'll lock into a pace at the start of a race, and then it will help you stay there, especially if you're going in a long straight line. So I've done a couple of long runs in the 2 before this launch. I've done kind of a 24k and a 32k run, and it does really just eat up those miles and make running at hard paces feel quite effortless if you are on those good roads, long straight roads. And I've also taken it down to 5k with a park run near me while I'm on holiday, and a session where I ran kind of a steady 5k and then a hard 3k. And I just think, even though it is billed at this long distance racer, it does those short distances very well as well. If you, like I say, you lock into a pace and it just helps you keep going. And while it doesn't have the same kind of aggressive roll forward feel of the Vaporfly, in those marathons last year in the original Alphafly, I certainly found it was helping my legs late on in races, because for starters, you've been protected more all the way through the race by the extra cushion stack here you've got going on. It does have, I think, a very efficient and almost natural feeling ride, despite the mad design you're looking at here. Towards the end of races, in the marathon, I was really clinging on. It just still felt, even though I feel like I'm slowing down, my pace was still there. And in general, I think with the Alphafly, you're getting that super shoe feeling to the max, where your rate of perceived exertion does not tally up with the pace. The pace is much quicker than you actually think you're going a lot of the time. It isn't obviously the most nimble shoe, and it really does excel under certain conditions on good roads, in straight lines. The Vaporfly excels in those conditions as well. Pretty much all carbon shoes do, but it is a bit nimbler. It takes corners better. On broken ground, you're going to get a bit more from the shoe just because it's a bit lighter and it picks up a bit faster. But once you are hammering down a good bit of road, then the Alphafly, I think, just gives you a little bit more back in terms of that bouncy, explosive feeling underfoot.
So run test then, I've done many miles, marathons. I've run PBs in the Vaporfly NEXT percent generations, first generation, second generation. It's been my favourite go-to race shoe for a long time. Whether I'm kind of racing any kind of distance, I would be putting this shoe on to go and chase PBs in it. No shoe has come along to topple it yet. I love this shoe. I think it's it makes you feel like you're going to race. It tips you up on your toes. I think it sort of encourages you to get into a really good good form. That's the only way I can run in it, really, is in good form. It's a bit less forgiving when you're getting a bit ragged. It's not a kind of shoe I kind of tend to like if I'm really struggling at the end of a marathon and I'm rocking back on my heels. But overall, just a really top performing race shoe that feels light, agile, nimble. I think it's quite good at cornering. I think for carbon shoes overall now with the big platforms, I think it's one of the most sort of direct, actually. It wasn't the case when you first put them on compared to other shoes, but that's the case. So I think it was going to take a lot to topple this shoe because it's just been a firm favourite overall. Now the Alphafly NEXT Percent 2 has come along, and I think it's actually changed that. In this shoe, I've run around kind of 50 miles. I've done a marathon test. I've done a half marathon, kind of very slow, easy pace. I've done some really kind of fast interval sessions chasing kind of mile PBs. And in fact, I've set a brand new mile PB in the Alphafly NEXT Percent 2 on very tired legs, doing a 5:30 minute mile. Whereas before, I've only ever run a 5:37, and that was a while back. And I had been training more for that. So the NEXT Percent, bigger platform, there's much more punch, much more kind of propulsion in them. I think you really feel that it's kind of got a less natural feel overall on the foot for me than the Vaporfly. Definitely less direct, even though they've kind of broadened out the forefoot and the heel to add a little bit of stability. It's, I don't think, quite got the sort of same stability that you might get from the NEXT Percent. But that said, I think it still is a good platform to run on. And the interesting thing is when I did those kind of slow miles with the Alphafly, even with my form a little bit more ragged or rocking back a little bit more on my heels, not up on my toes and doing that kind of high cadence run that I would be doing when I'm chasing a marathon PB, I think it coped really remarkably well. I think that makes it a very interesting shoe in terms of overall kind of versatility. I think that, yeah, you know, you're getting two sort of different feels. This one, you know, you definitely sort of feel a bit odd when you first put them on. It's kind of an odd sensation for the Alphafly 2. But for me now, if you're going to go and try and chase race times, I think over any distance from the mile up to the marathon, I would be reaching for the Alphafly NEXT% 2. Even though I've got that potential kind of heel rubbing, I think I would risk that over the marathon, stick some plasters on and go with it, even though I find it a little bit hard to get on. Once it's on the foot and you're moving, I think it does a great job. If I had one complaint about the Alphafly NEXT% over the Vaporfly NEXT% 2, it would be the heel counter. That inside here, you can sort of almost feel the heel counter comes up to this sort of edge here, and then the cushioning sits on top, at the top bit. Now, if this kind of crinkles and rolls, or when you're sort of squeezing your foot in, doesn't quite get to sit right, there's a bit back here that has blistered my heel. When I did the marathon test, I had to call it early at mile 21. I'm going to go and do a much longer run soon of 70 marathons in 70 days along the Danube, so I couldn't risk getting the blister before I go into that, and I had to call it. I probably would have managed through the last 5 miles with that kind of sensation. You do get blisters on marathons, it's fine, but that's not entirely a comfortable sensation. I don't get that with the Vaporfly NEXT%. These shoes don't cause me any trouble on that front at all, so that's one bit that I sort of, it is a bit of a word of caution. I'm just not sure in the back. I think I prefer the way the kind of heel construction is in this Vaporfly NEXT% 2 over the Alphafly NEXT% 2. I guess the other thing that I sort of found to mention, I think if you're going to be running a particularly twisty and turny course, there is probably a question mark over the overall stability of the Alphafly NEXT% 2. And you've got that massive kind of stack of foam when you're cornering tight. And actually, if you're going to be doing a 5K or a mile course or whatever under sort of conditions where you're really going to be doing switchbacks and tight turns, I think you might be better off reaching for the NEXT% 2 just because of that kind of directness and the control that you've got from the platform, that you're a bit sort of closer to the ground and there's a little bit less kind of wobble overall. But if you're going for something that's like a real big kind of city straight line tarmac kind of perfect conditions, you know, I think the Alphafly 2 will do the job better. So what I'm thinking about here is like this Alphafly NEXT% 2 would be my choice for big city marathons for sure over the NEXT% 2 now.
So it comes to just pure racing performance of the two shoes, I would certainly be leaning towards the Alphafly for marathons. I think it's still going to be my preferred half marathon pick like the original Alphafly was. And the Vaporfly does have maybe a little bit of an edge on shorter events just because it is lighter and nimbler, and when you're taking a corner at 5k pace, it's not always ideal to have such a big shoe on your foot like this. Vaporfly is also obviously better value, and that's something that's quite important to think about. I think, like, if you're someone like me who really lines up 2 big marathons every year and they're your key races and everything else kind of fits around them, then you want the best shoe on your foot for that marathon, and that's almost your priority, and that's why I would lean towards the Alphafly. If you're someone who just does maybe 1 marathon and you're doing lots of like local club races or short races generally, and you want that more versatile shoe, then the Vaporfly I think provides that, and it does so at a cheaper price, especially considering that the Alphafly 2 just coming out and the Vaporfly 2 has been out for a while and will be in lots of sales, whereas this shoe will not. And also, they're both great shoes for racing really at any distance, but they just do specialise in those different areas. The Alphafly is more of a long distance racer, but you'll still hammer out a very fast 5k in the shoe, and it would, maybe if I was on like a very long straight point to point 5k, it would be my pick over any shoe, just because I do think in a straight line the weight just doesn't come into play, because you're getting so much more from the foam and cushioning on the shoe. But then the weight does come into play when you start twisting and turning, just because it's actually more the size than the weight, I think. You lose a little bit of pace, slowing down into turns, worrying about them in this big shoe, whereas the Vaporfly, you can attack them a bit more aggressively. And then on the other foot, the Vaporfly is obviously a fantastic marathon racing shoe as well. It's just, I think you get a bit more protection from the Alphafly, and it just helps you just hold that pace from the start to the end beautifully, just because I really think it helps you get into a rhythm and protects the legs, and you just can finish strong because you are so well protected throughout the race. So yeah, that's what it might come down to. What's your preferred kind of racing, and also what's your budget? Because the Vaporfly is going to give you better value for sure, just because it is now available for so much less than the Alphafly. But if you are lining up, like I say, I've just started Berlin marathon training. It's my big target race for the year, and you know, looking at that race on the calendar, this is the shoe I plan to have on my foot for it. And if you are just looking for that all-out best of the best pick, then maybe it's worth splashing out on the Alphafly for your marathons.
I guess I've kind of given it away a little bit. For a long time, whenever I did a verdict on which kind of race shoe, which carbon racer I'd be picking, which lacing up to go and chase PBs, it was always the Vaporfly NEXT% 2. It's changed, people. I now have a new one. This is it. I think if I'm basically chasing times across any distance, I'm now going to be lacing up the Alphafly NEXT% 2. Despite the fact that it's a little bit of an alien feeling underfoot, there is a question mark in my head about, you know, as the purest kind of sense, should we really be sort of running in these? But listen, if you want to chase a time and all of that doesn't matter to you, this is the fastest shoe, I think, to put on by any stretch. Over all of the tests, it was giving me 10 to 15 seconds at least. I've run 33 miles in it over the last 2 days, and this morning I've woken up and my legs are fresh enough to go again. It works when you're a bit fatigued, so if you're gambling on races where things might not go always according to plan for the whole race for you, I think you're going to get a bit more versatility. You can rock back a bit in this, and there's a bit more protection you'll get from the Vaporflies, which I think tend to only really kind of work when I'm personally running in kind of my finest form, so it could be a bit difficult if you end up struggling towards the end of the race. So yeah, my verdict, Alphafly NEXT% 2 versus the Vaporfly NEXT% 2. We have a new winner. My favourite race shoe now is the Alphafly NEXT% 2.
That's it, guys. That is our comparison of the Vaporfly and Alphafly 2. Please let us know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.